Hi, and welcome back. This is Dutch the Podcast. My name is Mike, and joining me, as always, publisher of Dutch the Magazine and all things Dutch at Dutch the Media, Tom Byfoot. How's it going, Tom?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Mike? Great to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. It's so funny because today's show kind of we traverse the whole country to make sure the interviews happen. You're on the west. I'm in the east, and our guest at another point in Canada altogether. But it's delightful to be back with you.
Yeah, it's great, and we're going to be doing another 10 episodes. Stay tuned for what's coming next.
Well, we're kicking off the next 10 with a really good guest today, and we'll get to Karen in just a couple of minutes and get you to set her up. But a couple of things that I did want to mention as I reach for my keyboard here. We always encourage you. Look at this, Tom. I don't want to come off over professional here in any way, but we do love it when you reach out to us. So don't hesitate to contact us with your questions and your feedback at dutchthemedia.com. You'll find a form there where you can certainly contact us. What else is at Dutch the Media? Everything.
Everything is at Dutch the Media. Our books, for example, our Dutch in Wartime book series, which will come up during the chat we're going to have, the conversation we're going to have with Karen Hunter, who organized this amazing tour of the Netherlands that everyone has to hear about, and that we're going to be talking about with her in the upcoming interview. But yeah, the Dutch in Wartime series, my own book, the beautiful book from episode 4 when we spoke to Rosemary Sloat about her parents' immigration experience, and everything that we publish, our Dutch language newspaper, everything can be purchased through dutchthemedia.com.
Today's guest comes right out of the pages of Dutch the Magazine. And, you know, it's wonderful. We're putting this out. If you're not watching it right away, putting this out in time. There it is right there.
So this is the issue in which Karen's story appears. It's a July-August issue, but it can be purchased through our website, back copies or digital copies. So Karen organized this tour for children and descendants of Canadian veterans who served in Europe during World War II. And well, maybe we should just listen to what Karen has to say about it.
It's a fascinating interview. We'll leave it to you and Karen and this incredible story.
So welcome to Dutch the Podcast, Karen. We're talking to Karen Hunter, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Remembrance Torch. Karen, could you tell us what the Canadian Remembrance Torch is?
The mission of the Canadian Remembrance Torch is to energize remembrance and to create a culture of gratitude for the sacrifices that have been made for peace and freedom, especially among the younger generation, among our youth, and to encourage them to be mindful of this.
So you're a not-for-profit organization, right?
Yes, yes, registered charity.
You're new, right? You've only been around for a few years. Is that correct?
That's right. Really, the essence of the charity began in 2019 as the not-for-profit in our father's footsteps. And then a couple of years after that, during the postponement of that event, I registered the charity as a registered charity, the Canadian Remembrance Torch.
And you've done a lot of things with the organization already, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But maybe let's go back to the beginning. This all stems from your own family background, and you're growing up with a veteran father that you really didn't know much about what had transpired during the war for both your parents. Maybe start there.
Yes, exactly. Growing up, my father never spoke about the war, really much like all of our veterans. And frankly, I never really asked him about it either, though I knew that the Second World War had played a significant role in my parents' lives and had really changed their lives. And I knew this just by the various mementos around the house that were unusual, a pair of small Dutch clogs, photos. At Christmas, we would receive Christmas cards from people with very unusual sounding names for us at that age. And my mother always wore a watch that I found in later years had been given to her by her fiance. She was engaged at the time of the war, and he served with the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was a pilot, and his plane was shot down over Germany on Valentine's Day in 1945. And she always wore that watch. And so, as I say, we never asked many questions, but we always knew that my parents had this backstory.
Yeah. So your mother lost her fiance during the war, and your father served in Europe during the war. So yeah, that's a heavy burden, and you often hear that. And my grandfather, he was in the Merchant Marine, and he sailed the convoys. He never spoke about those times, and you see that with many veterans, right?
Yes. I think it was typically the case. They tended to put those memories far in the back of their minds. And at least in my father's case, he had a very positive attitude to life. He was always very upbeat. It didn't, one of his favorite expressions, whenever there was any sort of an argument or any sort of negativity around, he would always sort of stop the conversation and say, it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining and the birds are singing. And that was our cue that was the end of that line of conversation. And I wonder years later if it was his way of coping with some of the memories.
Yeah, and we know a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder now, and I'm not saying that's the case in your father's case, but you hear a lot about people who try to keep those memory under lock and key, but then at some point they spill out. Now that happened with your dad as well, I believe, right?
Yes, well, it never really spilled out in the same ways as it did, I believe, for many other veterans, because what was interesting for me when I was organizing the event In Our Father's Footsteps, and Canadians would reach out to me, and their first line was always, "My father never talked about the war." It kind of became a bit of a code. If you said the code, you were part of the group. And I came to think after a while that many of us experienced sort of the same lifestyle growing up or experience. And I remember one of the participants corrected me and said, there are a lot of similarities about our parents' war experience, but I know that there are many differences, because I don't think that your father experienced nightmares and alcoholism and these sorts of things, and he certainly didn't. So that when it came spilling out, as you say, it was in a very positive way. It was he wrote this memoir very late in life, and in the introduction, he says that he was writing that for the family, to answer questions we may have had and provide information we may not know. And but even his memoir was very upbeat. There really aren't many, if very few, stories that are sad or really have any sort of the details you would associate with war.
Yeah, and he did experience those. I think one of the stories. Just for our listeners, you wrote an article for Dutch the magazine that was published in our July-August 2023 issue, in which you talk about his friend Harry, and that was maybe you can talk about that a little bit and what he experienced in his campaign from Italy to the Netherlands in Europe.
Yes, Harry is kind of an incredible story, I think. Where it started was as you say, in my father's memoir, I read about Harry. It was really one of the only sad events that he had documented. And he explained that they had enlisted together in Toronto. My dad was 22. Harry was older. He was in his 30s. And they both enlisted with the 30th Light Anti-Aircraft Unit. And they became very good friends and did a lot of things together, trained together across the country. And then at some point, they went their separate ways. My father went to the UK to run a motorcycle school, and I'm not exactly sure where Harry went, but somewhere else. And then later in the memoir, he talks about how thrilled he was when in Italy, lo and behold, he runs into Harry again, and they were part of the same regiment. And he was really quite excited about that. And however, it was shortly after they entered Holland, it was in April, just before the war ended. And over the radio, my father heard that Harry had been shot and killed. And he raced there by Jeep and arrived just as they were sewing Harry up in his blanket. And so he helped to transport Harry to his temporary place of burial. And so that was the beginning only of the Harry story. What ended up happening is when I went to the Netherlands to do research for In Our Father's Footsteps, I went to Holton, and which became Harry's final resting place.
Yeah, and Holton's the big Canadian War Cemetery where many, many veterans found their last resting place.
Exactly. So I went to pay my respects at Harry's grave and left a stone. Harry was Jewish, and I left a stone on his headstone. And while I was there, the people at Holton told me that they had some new information about Harry, and they gave it to me. And lo and behold, I discovered that Harry was born in the community where I live in Guelph, Ontario. Okay. He wasn't born in Toronto, as my father would have thought. And so when I returned to Guelph, I went to the museum and happened to mention to them that I'd noticed his name wasn't on the cenotaph. And they assured me that it should be once they had done their research. And so come Remembrance Day that year, they added Harry's name to the Guelph cenotaph. And you might think that the story ends there, which frankly, even at that point, it was a very strange feeling for me because I felt like I'd altered my father's memoir. That wasn't how the story ended in his world. Harry wasn't on the Guelph cenotaph. It was like, but I realized it was sort of part of my story and the beginning of a whole new story. So in any case, I posted on social media that his name had been added to the cenotaph, and it was just a brief social media post on Facebook. Soon after that, I got a message from someone, and he said, someone from your organization has posted a story about my great uncle. And it turned out his name was Elliot Schiff. Harry was his great uncle. And he'd been writing a book about Harry, and he'd been going across the country interviewing veterans. And he put a note in, or an ad, I guess, in the Legion magazine, Lost Trails, asking, was there anyone who knew Harry and that could tell him about him? And my father responded. And so he read a letter that my father had written to him about Harry. And
you didn't know about the letter, Karen?
No, I didn't know about any of it.
That's amazing. Wow.
And so then at that point, of course, I told him I was thinking about organizing In Our Father's Footsteps. And of course, he said, I have to come on this event. And he brought his brother from Israel. And the rest of the story is in the article. As you know, essentially the Dutch volunteers kind of recreated the whole Harry story in the Netherlands for our pilgrimage. So on one of the days, we took a detour from our path along the steps of the Canadian troops to this field. And in the field were 14 hand-painted crosses, one with the Star of David, and photos of those that had been temporarily buried there. And the Dutch volunteers found the woman who'd lived in that farmhouse back when she was 14 at the time Harry was buried there. And so she attended what turned out to be a ceremony we held there. She brought her grandchildren who were her age when she passed these graves each day on her way to school, and she laid field flowers there. And as part of the ceremony, her grandchildren laid field flowers on these graves. And it didn't even stop there. They took us to the farm where Harry was actually killed. And the grandfather still lives there. He remembers the day. And I remember him saying that he recalled a Jeep coming there to pick up the body that had been sewn into the blankets and take it for burial. Well, of course, this would have been—
That was your father, right?
Yes. So it was one of many incredible stories that we experienced in our father's footsteps that related to this more.
I'm reading that. It's absolutely fascinating. It's amazing because I didn't know that the rest of the backstory that you got in touch with was his I suppose it's grandnephew or
Yes.
niece.
Yes.
But let's go back to In Our Father's Footsteps, because what exactly is that? How did you get the inspiration to organize that? And then the amazing success it had. I read about 150 participants and you even having to turn people away. So yes. What prompted the organization of that tour?
Yes, well, it was kind of what you might think of as a perfect storm of events. I just turned 50, and I was ready to climb Kilimanjaro. It was something I wanted to do as a celebration of that event. And just a few weeks before I left, my father died. And so everything kind of came together in that event. And climbing Kilimanjaro was not unlike some of the spiritual journeys I took after that. Certainly Kilimanjaro kind of became the seed of that path. So that after Kilimanjaro, I did a number of things. I lived for a time with some monks in the Himalayas at a monastery. I did a silent retreat in India, and went across the Thar Desert by camel. A number of very sort of long spiritual journeys that give you time to really think. And the one I took just prior to making this decision was the Camino. And certainly it's a very long walk. And I began to think about my father's experience and how the Second World War had changed both his life and my mother's life, and by extension, my life. And that's when I got this idea that wouldn't it be interesting to use my father's memoir as a guide and inspiration to walk in his footsteps in the Netherlands for the 75th anniversary of the Dutch liberation and end of the Second World War. And at that time, it was just my own personal journey. I was just going to do it myself. And I enlisted the help of the Dutch family that had billeted my parents when they went back for the liberation anniversaries in 1985 and 1995. And I didn't know what they would make of the idea, but they embraced it wholeheartedly.
So this is a Dutch couple, younger, right?
Yes.
Born after the war, probably.
Yeah, well, back in 85, they had a very young family, and they billeted my parents in Apeldoorn. And so that was
when they went back for the celebration of
yes.
40 years of liberation, right?
Exactly. And then they went back again for the 50th anniversary. And by then the couple had moved to Uden, but they were insistent that my parents stay with them again. And that family, over the course of years, now over 30 years, 35 years, have become part of our family. And we're very close. And the wife, Ons, they're named Peter and Ons. Ons has been to Canada, almost annually since then. And just such a wonderful, kind person. I can think even when my father passed away, after he passed away in 2009, Ons would come for a couple of weeks to stay with my mother and just pamper her. She would, cook for her and read with her and take her wherever she wanted to go and just be her companion for a couple of weeks. So very, very special people. And so when I told them about this, as I say, they just embraced the idea and decided that it was my dream and that my dream needed to come true and they would make it come true. And that's what they set about doing. And by amazing coincidence, Peter, the husband, had exactly the right background in travel and logistics, and he was ex-military as well. And so they were determined to make it come true. So I traveled to the Netherlands in 2019 to do research, and we were going to try to figure out where had my father gone and what was his path. And at that time, I walked in the 4 Days Marches. And as I was walking along the Via de Gladiola...
Yeah, for our listeners, maybe the 4 Day Marches, that's an annual event in the Netherlands, in the town of Nijmegen, where participants walk 40 kilometers for 4 consecutive days. And then on the final day, they finish in Nijmegen. And there's a big party and there's people along the streets handing out flowers. And it's a big event. And there are a lot of groups that participate in that as groups, right? Sorry to interrupt, Karen.
Yes, no, that's a good description. And though, as I say, the walk is pretty grueling, and again, or at least for a novice like me,
it could be very hot, right? As well. I don't know how it was when you were there.
Yes, and certainly by the fourth day of that marathon, you're certainly feeling it. But again, it's a little bit like the Camino in the sense that it's a very long walk, and it gives you a lot of time to think. And so as I was finishing the walk along the Via de Gladiola, and there was this massive outpouring of Dutch love, and many of them knew I was Canadian, and I thought to myself that other descendants of Second World War veterans who served in the Netherlands really need to see this, because it's truly inexplicable. My father had tried to describe it, and he would usually finish by saying there just aren't any words for it, and which didn't help. And so you really have to experience it to really understand it. And so it was at that moment that I thought I really must invite other people. And so when I returned to Canada, I did a large number of interviews and across the country, and basically put out an invitation countrywide for anyone who wanted to join me on this journey. And I had no idea whether anyone would be interested in coming. And I was amazed, hundreds, more than hundreds.
I'm excited because I know what happened, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people contacted me. And, it was never a situation where they would say, this sounds interesting or something like that. The responses were all the same. In addition to saying, my father never talked about the war, that was the opener, they would always say things like, oh my God, this is incredible. I have to go. Make sure my name's on the list. I don't care. Just make sure my name's on the list. And that was the standard reaction. People were over the top. They would say they'd wanted to do it all their lives.
You experienced it, and you know why the children of the veterans have that feeling. But is there a way you can describe that, explain that, why that huge interest and why it was so emotional for so many of you?
Well, what I believe, and it's really part of the reason I founded the charity, is that there is a huge need for remembrance in Canada, and very few, if any, opportunities beyond November 11th. And so it became my mission to create these opportunities that people could become engaged with and immersed in remembrance. And so that was one of the reasons and one of the incentives for me to create the charity. The other was that many people contacted me and would say that they'd always wanted to share their father or their grandfathers or their uncles' war experience with their children or their grandchildren. and they didn't know what it was. They couldn't find the information. It was so hard to research. And so that was another incentive for me, and among my initiatives, to make it easier for Canadians to obtain this information and to share the stories. And but certainly there was just a massive interest. I had a huge waiting list. People were literally kind of fighting among each other to be the one to be picked as the next person to be able to go. I could have filled the trip several times back in.
And how many in the end did you end up taking on the tour?
How many? And in 2022 there were about 100. There were originally 150, and that was as many as we could accommodate in some of the venues. And otherwise it could have even been more. But then, so as you know, it was scheduled for May 2020, and then of course COVID hit, which devastated us. We were on such a high at that point. But and so were the Dutch volunteers, because on the other side of the ocean, Peter and Ons had amassed literally an army of volunteers. And so everybody was really, really disappointed. And so then in May 2020, we felt pretty confident. I mean, it was such a crazy, unusual thing to have happen that we thought, well, okay, then it'll be May 2021. What can you do? And we just assumed that's what was happening. Then, of course, as you know, May 2021 came along, and then we postponed it to September 2021. May 2022, and then it happened in September 2022. And by then, there were still a number of people very concerned about traveling during COVID. And so that was why the numbers reduced at that point. And so many people were so sad about it, saying, I really want to come, but I'm just not comfortable yet. So
yeah, no, I understand. Now, for just to change topics a little bit, behind you, for the people watching this on YouTube and not just listening on Spotify, you have an object behind you that is the torch that you carry. Can you tell me a little bit about the torch and how that came about?
Yes, the Canadian Remembrance Torch. It came about during the postponement, which was basically about 2.5 years between when we were meant to go in May 2020 and September 2022. I partnered with McMaster University, and a team of engineering students there designed and built the Canadian Remembrance Torch. And I don't know if you can see, but it's very much Dutch themed with tulips and maple leaves representing the friendship between the two countries, the ascending doves for peace, and the souls that were lost during the Second World War. And along the bottom and top are curved lines representing water and the significance of water during the Second World War, and especially in the Netherlands. And so I mean, as I was organizing In Our Father's Footsteps originally in 2019, and during all of my interviews, I kept saying to people, together as the next generation will carry the torch of remembrance. And I realized there was just nothing there, and there needed to be. And so, as I say, the university held a design competition, and the winning team built and designed this torch. And it came with us, and the student team also, to the Netherlands.
Oh, that's amazing! So the students joined you on the tour.
Yes. So the students also came. They carried the torch. The torch led the Canadian contingent as we walked through farmers' fields and forests and liberated villages, and the torch was there the whole time. And yeah.
Wow, that's amazing, and it's also great that you got the younger generation, because I wanted to note your tagline on your website says reframing remembrance for the next generation. Maybe we can get to that towards the end of our conversation. But first, I'd like to ask you, because I'm Dutch. I grew up in the Netherlands. We heard about the war all the time. And we also heard about the role the Canadians played in the liberation of Holland. So I'm just wondering if you could describe your reception in the Netherlands by the Dutch public and your Dutch volunteers. Now, how many Dutch volunteers were involved in the organization, and how were you received in the various towns and villages, and what kind of really special ceremonies stand out for you?
Oh, well, you won't be surprised, I'm sure, to hear that we received just an incredible welcome from the Dutch. I sound like my father when I say there are no words to describe it. But as we would walk, for instance, into the villages, as I say, we were led by the torch, and ahead of the torch, we often had a pipe band, and we would come through the torch and through the village, and they would be clapping and cheering and just incredible welcomes. And it seemed that the smaller the village, the grander the welcome. I can think of one village of Etten, and we nicknamed it the Singing Village of Etten. Every corner we went around, there was a choir singing, and just incredible voices, and there were bands, an orchestra. They played the Canadian anthem, the Dutch anthem, just an incredible reception. And we had another reception just almost shortly after that in Doetinchem, very similar, with refreshments and singing and dancing, and just incredible. So that there were so many villages that welcomed us like that. In the little village of Varnsveld, the community dedicated a plaque and a maple leaf tree to In Our Father's Footsteps, the group, and specifically to my father as the inspiration for the pilgrimage. And so that was very special. They had me unveil the plaque in front of this maple leaf tree. And in the village of Ulmen was another very incredible ceremony that happened at night. We walked about a mile in the darkness, carrying 40 torches, led by the Canadian Remembrance Torch, but many of the participants, 40 of them, had carried large torches. And these torches represented 40 Canadians who were temporarily buried in Ulmen, and later moved to their final resting places. So we walked in the dark behind the pipe band, which was incredible. And we arrived in Ulmen, and the community was all there. And they placed all of the 40 torches in holders in the ground in the shape of a very large heart. And then we sat beside that, and in the dark, we listened to a beautiful ceremony. And it was really, really a very touching, special event. And then, of course, what can I say about the event at Het Palace with Princess Margaret? We walked to the Man with Two Hats, and we held a ceremony there. And then we walked up Lulan to the palace, and the Dutch organizers had arranged for there to be a large banner of my father off to one side as we were walking up, which kind of got my.
And you didn't know about that, because I read about it in the article, so that was a real surprise for you.
There were lots of little surprises that they had put in intentionally, because I'd been quite involved with the organizing of the overall pilgrimage. And Peter and Ons were determined that there would be some things that I wouldn't know about. And so they sprinkled those throughout so that it would be as new for me as for the participants. So no, I didn't know about this huge banner. So we arrived at Het Palace, and Princess Marguerite participated in a passing the torch to the next generation ceremony.
Yeah, and Princess Margaret, the aunt of the current King of the Netherlands, but of course was born in Ottawa during the war when her family were in exile in Canada. And she's always had a very strong bond with Canada, and specifically with Canadian veterans. She always visits veterans when she visits Canada, which she often does. And so you met with her, and she received you at her palace at Low near Apeldoorn.
Yes, yes. So we had a lovely event there, and yeah, those were some of the highlights. I mean, every day, we just did incredible things. We had, and not to mention, we walked the 60 kilometers in the footsteps of the Canadian troops in platoons, and our platoons matched the units our fathers had served in. We wore red vests, so we really stood out wherever we went. It was like this river of red running through the fields. And all of the Dutch volunteers had a blue vest. There were hundreds of them. Many of them walked with us, and so we had guides we had guides with us that explained everything around us. We had written guides that told us everything about our surroundings. Lots of military themed aspects to the walk. We stayed in a place called Azerwald, which was previously a Canadian field hospital, and it was done up to make it feel like it was a barracks. It's a lovely, lovely hotel, but it was made to feel like barracks for us. And there were just so many incredible aspects to so many details that Peter and Ons included, so that it was a very immersive experience. Not to mention, we of course held many ceremonies and commemorations. We visited the big three Canadian war cemeteries at Holton, Roosbeek, and Bergen-op-Zoom, and as well as many Canadian monuments, and we held ceremonies at all of those. And
yeah, what a lot of Canadians who don't have direct connections with this like you do, but a lot of Canadians don't understand how deep that bond for the Netherlands is with Canada, and how grateful, even I was born after the war, but I carry that gratitude, and so do many of my generation, even our children. One of the things we did, you asked us, we published a series of memoirs by Dutch people of the war called the Dutch in Wartime series. And a number of your participants and you yourself read the series in preparation for the walk. And maybe that just sketches a little bit why the relief, the gratitude of liberation was so big, because Holland had gone through a devastating winter, famine, and had been under Nazi occupation, brutal occupation for 5 years. So the liberation could not have come any sooner. And the Canadians played such a big part in the liberation of the Netherlands. We probably don't have time to go into the Battle of the Scheldt, which is not that well known, but lots of Canadian young men gave their lives in that battle. So that's how it lives on in the Netherlands. But of course, we also would like to see it live on in Canada. And maybe we can get back to that reframing remembrance for the next generation a little bit, Karen. What's your intention with that, and how is that going?
Well, certainly In Our Father's Footsteps, and the time that I've spent in the Netherlands has had a huge influence on the charity, and really serves as my inspiration. As you say, whenever you go there, that feeling of gratitude, I feel it's so important that that Canadians not only be aware of that Dutch gratitude, but I began thinking about, what about our gratitude? And I felt that it really needed attention. That all our lives, myself included, frankly, I've taken that gift that I've been given of peace and freedom for granted. I've never known anything but what I have. And, you know, when you go there and you hear the stories, you read the stories, you begin to realize that it could have been very different. And so that much of what I do really is kind of transporting many of the Dutch ideas and initiatives here to Canada, so that the idea for me and for the charity is that remembrance isn't just something that happened in the past. It needs to be relevant for the present and for the future, and that's how we will connect with the next generation. Because I know even myself, gosh, when I was young, and I think to myself, heck, the Second World War happened like over 10 years ago, you know, and I think, what does that have to do with me? And it happened way over in Europe. What does that have to do with me? And so it's a case of bringing that into the present and focusing on peace and freedom, and how we need to treasure that today and into the future. And as well, I think it's important that we bring in other emotions, and this is done so well in the Netherlands. Emotions beyond sadness. In Canada, in addition to the fact that it's very, for instance, Remembrance Day is very historically oriented. It's something that, you know, we think about those who died in the Second World War, First World War. That has been the focus, and it's typically sad. Well, it's like your May 4th, but in our case, it's the only day of the year. November 11th, it's a very sad day, and that's really the only exposure young people get to it. And so when they just have to hear the word remembrance, and there's a certain heaviness to it, a sadness. And my goal is to bring in other emotions of pride, celebration, and the Dutch do this very well. And so that is an aspect that I work really hard on. And then I suppose the third aspect is that in Canada, it's one day a year. Whereas I believe that our attitude should be that every day is a Remembrance Day, not just November 11th. And again, this is done very well in the Netherlands. When I was there, there were year-round commemorations. And so really the charity is an effort to bring many of the Dutch practices to Canada. And some of my initiatives are directly inspired from Dutch initiatives. My initiative, Faces to Names, is directly inspired from Faces to Graves. And the idea of Faces to Names is to put a face and a story to every Canadian who has died while in service to peace and freedom. And so that every name on every cenotaph across the country has a photo and a story. And there would be a QR code at the cenotaph or the cemetery so that you can access that person's photo and story.
And that story would be online, the photo and the story would be online then and reachable through that QR
exactly.
code.
And so the Faces to Names will really be an online remembrance resource that ideally will be built by and for students. They won't build the infrastructure, but they will build the content. And I'm hoping in that way that we can engage young people, because this resource would use very modern technology and engagement techniques that would engage them in ways that they haven't been engaged before. And it would provide a lot of information that has never been known before through indexing and things of this nature. So Faces to Names, as I say, was very much inspired by a similar initiative in the Netherlands. And then, of course, the Canadian Remembrance Torch. I didn't mention that when we were there after the ceremony at Hetlo, we gifted a replica of the Canadian Remembrance Torch to the Dutch Orange Committees. And that torch has been used extensively since it was left there. So through 2023, here in Canada, this torch has been to lots of very high-profile events across the country. For instance,
But to Parliament, I saw as well,
yes,
right?
yes, it's been to Parliament, it's been to the legislature. The lighting of the torch in May opened the Canadian Tulip Festival. It was also just recently in Ottawa at the Dutch Embassy's exhibition on the Battle of the Scheldt, and was in Halifax for the Navy's Fleet Week. It's been all over the country. But at the same time, the replica torch in the Netherlands, it had many events back in May, and just finished some events in September. And it was part of the Nijmegen marches in July. And so it is extensively used there too.
That's fantastic. Now, I'm sure that a lot of listeners would be interested to know if there is going to be a future tour. Now, I believe you're planning something for the, what would it be, the 85th or the 80th celebration.
Yes. Yeah.
And but to be clear, this is for descendants of Canadian veterans who fought in Europe, right? Who served in Europe.
Yes. Originally, we said who had served in the Netherlands, but really, I guess it really includes those who served in Europe because, well, there are various circumstances. The reality is they all contributed to the end result. But to your point, back in 2019 and 2020, when I was originally organizing the pilgrimage, I had so many Dutch people contact me saying, I have to come. I know it's for descendants of second, but I have to come. And it was so hard. I could have filled the trip many times with just Dutch people.
Dutch immigrants to Canada, but no, it's for children, grandchildren of veterans.
It really is, but as well, interestingly, the event we originally planned for 2020, and then it happened in 2022, was to be a one-time only event. And we were really quite adamant, one time only, once in a lifetime, that's it. And then after it was over, it was realized that it was such a massive success for the participants and for the Dutch volunteers that Peter approached me and he said, I know you only do things once, but we found that we brought so much joy to so many Canadians. We have to do this again. And so the irony for me is that first time round, Peter was fulfilling my dream. And now this time, I think I may be fulfilling Peter's dream.
That's wonderful. Well, maybe that's a good point to end the conversation on. We're running pretty close to time, but people would want to know: is the tour full yet, or is there still an opportunity for people to join?
Oh well, there will be absolutely opportunities to join. We aren't even initiating the registration or anything until 2024. So early in 2024, they can check the Facebook site for In Our Father's Footsteps and anything they'd want to know in terms of dates and registration, and it will all be posted there.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to say to our listeners, check out the rap video that you have on your website. I really enjoyed that. That was so beautifully done as well.
Well,
Karen, I think we could talk for another hour and another few hours and still not be done. Unfortunately, I have to sort of wrap it here. Is there anything else you'd like to end on and anything you'd like to share?
Oh, well, we've covered a lot. Just that it's been a wonderful experience for me, and it's a just a passion that grows, and I think anyone who travels to the Netherlands and feels the Dutch gratitude can't help but be inspired to become engaged with Remembrance and learn more about it.
Can you just mention where we can find out more? What's your website, Facebook, etc.?
Yes, all of my social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or what was previously Twitter, is at Canadian Torch. And the website is Canadian Remembrance Torch.ca. And within that site, you'll see the initiative In Our Father's Footsteps. If you click on that, it will take you to the In Our Father's Footsteps website, but it won't actually be an active site until probably early in 2024.
Okay, well, we'll keep that in mind for all those children, grandchildren, great grandchildren of Canadian veterans who served in Europe to liberate Europe from oppression and to guarantee freedom going forward. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us on Dutch the Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Karen Hunter and the Remembrance Torch. What an incredible idea. Right out of the gate, it's such a beautiful idea. But here's what I learned right there. The children of these veterans, the people that served in this horrible, horrible war and in the end liberated the wonderful people of the Netherlands, these were stories that were only told in glimpses and the parents didn't talk about this. To unravel the story as a story of triumphant, freedom and liberation was a really great way to spin Remembrance Day in Canada.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how what started really as a personal quest for Karen turned into an organization that brought more than 100 people over from Canada to the Netherlands, engaged hundreds of Dutch volunteers, and has spawned an entire charity that's bringing remembrance to the next generation. Just an amazing story.
And all the beautiful intent of the Netherlands with the detail that they put into this visit. What transpired in May was just simply incredible. And of course, now she puts it out there that this will be what sounds like an ongoing remembrance opportunity here in Canada.
I believe so, and definitely they're planning for the next anniversary in 2025, and through initiatives like these, we'll keep the remembrance going. And it's fascinating if you go to her website and see how young people were involved, for example, in designing that torch or in creating a rap song about gratitude. Great initiative. And another great example of the strong bond between Canada and the Netherlands that we, of course, cover in our magazines, in our books all the time. So that's what we're about, and we got a very clear picture about what the Canadian Remembrance Torch is all about as well.
I think it's pretty cool that she has that Remembrance Torch. I mean, that and the Stanley Cup in your house are two of the coolest things you can have on display of Canadiana. Well, listen, Tom, that was an incredible interview. Thank you for taking us deeper into that story with Karen so that we can, as Canadians and potentially as expats of the Netherlands and people who had that experience, engage a little more. We certainly all appreciate that. I'll remind you, subscribe to this podcast right here. Many more great stories, and go back in time because we've had an unbelievable lineup of great guests along the way to tell us their story and give us their Dutch perspective. And I'll remind you one more time, DutchTheMedia.com. Get your most recent edition of Dutch the Magazine. Tom, what am I forgetting? Your fantastic book.
Hiding in Plain Sight. Still available through Amazon or on our own website at DutchTheMedia.com.
Tom, I'm glad to reunite with you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Soon.